Board members, thank you for coming. I've called Eric Peterson and Marcia to see if they're on their way, and I left a voicemail for Marcia, and Eric won't be able to make it. So fortunately, we have a quorum. Thank you for showing up. We ran into a problem last time of having only 2 people, and that's not a quorum. So the good news for the people who have the appeal is that it gets to be heard. It's unfortunate that we don't have all 5 members to get their perspective, but that's all right. I'm sure we'll do fine in conducting the hearing. We do need to elect a interim or temporary chair for this meeting because we don't have a chair here. Paul Spieler was the chair for the year. So if you would, I think the first order of business would be for someone to make a motion.
Us, John Maloney, I'd like to make a motion that Pat be the chair.
Second.
Pat has to accept that. Yeah, okay.
Sign me up.
Wow, that
Okay.
that went down fast, Pat.
Okay.
Pat's got some experience. He's been a chair before, so thank you for the motion in the second. And if you'll all vote on that, on the
Aye.
motion of Pat being chair,
Aye.
it was unanimous that Pat will chair the meeting. So Pat, do you have the big font?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. I don't think there are any other announcements that I need to make other than to just note, as it says on the agenda guide, that testimony is generally limited to 2 minutes. However, you can give your time to someone else, so you can accumulate minutes as long as that person's here in the room at the time that they're giving their minutes. So,
Yeah, we've got 3 of them that want to pass on.
okay. Yeah, and then it's going to be up to you, Mr. Chair, at your judgment as to whether or not you want to hold them strictly to the 2 minutes each or allow more. That's up to you and the board. So at any time in the hearing. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Okay.
Yes, so it's at the discretion of the board, and the chair runs the meeting. As a rule, kind of like at city council, if you have someone here that wants to give 2 minutes to another speaker, they can, and you can do that with anybody who's in the room. The rule is they have to be in the room, so they can't give you their 2 minutes from home. Kind of, they have to be here and give it to you. So if there are other people that want to donate their 2 minutes, take a moment to fill out the blue speaker slips that let us know who you're donating your 2 minutes to, and then the chair can recognize that. So it looks like we probably won't have any problem getting to at least probably 20 or more minutes, so that's good. Yeah. Well, so this is your testimony, right? But then there's also question and answer. So the board can go beyond that, right, and say, hey, we have a question we'd like to have answered, and the conversation can go on for, like last time, right? Quite a time, yeah. Robert's Rules of Order, huh?
Thank you.
Oh, and here's Marcia.
There we go. Now we got 4 of us.
Sorry, I'm a little late.
Marcia, good to have you.
All right, Marcia, we haven't started the hearing on the item yet, so you made it in.
Very good, thank you. Hi. Hi, Greta.
Pat is going to be chairing. The board already voted, so Pat's going to chair this hearing. And I'd like to ask all of the board members to make sure your green light is on your microphone, and just leave it on. That way you don't have to push it while you're trying to have a conversation.
We get an extra 8 minutes. We'll listen.
Just for history's sake, so you know, we have had someone come in and I don't remember, did they go on for like 45 minutes? I mean, we had to like, you know, get the gaff sort of. You're coming off the stage, buddy. Just one more, like just 20 more slides. We're like, no way. Okay, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
all yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Call this meeting to order. Next will be roll call, which is John Maloney,
Here.
Eric Pedersen, absent, Vincent Wood,
Here.
Marcia Zellis,
Here.
Andrew Stuffler.
Here.
Next, we'll open the public comment if there's anybody not speaking on what we have on the agenda. If anyone would like to speak now. Nope. Well, we do it now. Anything that's not on the agenda, they can speak now.
And then they'll have an opportunity to
Yeah.
speak after the
Yeah.
staff report, yeah. So there's two
Okay.
general public comment, non-agendized items.
Okay. All right, we will close the public comment right now at this point. And then approval of the minutes from the 3/1 of 2018. Are there any comments from the board on the the minutes? No?
Comments from
No?
me.
Okay. Is there a motion?
This is John Maloney. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Okay. Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Okay.
Are there any announcements that the city would like to?
No announcements,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Next, we will move on to the appeal for the decision of the building officials to the issue a permit for 836 De La Guerra Terrace. And at this point, I think we would have the staff like to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to stand by my staff report of May 3rd. And just to summarize the report, I just tried to go through all the activities that were milestone activities as part of the building permit plan check process. It should be noted that in this particular plan check, the City Planning Division made the threshold decision of whether or not Public Works Transportation needed to review the application. As a rule, if there's no change proposed for the parking arrangement on site, they're not doing anything with the garage or the driveway, then the City Planning does not forward it. They NA it. They do not apply, and they do not request Public Works Transportation to look at any application, whether it's an ADU or any project. So that's a standard protocol for us.
Okay. Next, we would move on to the appellant would like to present. It's time for you to speak. Yeah. You tell us who you are, too. The green light on?
Oh, I'm colorblind, so you have to excuse me. So, my name is William Curran. I'm speaking for my neighborhood, about 40 neighbors who are very concerned and opposed to the ADU at 836 De La Guerra. Let me see if I'm a bit of a Luddite, so there we go. We have certain kind of reasons for the appeal. I'm not going to read them off because it'll just bore you half to death. But for those of you who don't know the street, it's a very narrow cul-de-sac in the Lower Riviera in the High Fire District. And it has some severe parking problems. And part of the problems is that there's not enough spaces, and also everyone in the area parks there, because it's very, you may know the area, but De La Guerra Street, and people are parking in the little private streets off of there, and anybody who comes to visit. So it's sometimes looks like Dodger Stadium after a game. And sometimes the city thinks that it's only because of construction, but when it's construction, well, nobody gets in or out. I mean, it's kind of a bit ridiculous. Just to give you kind of a flavor, I apologize to any of my other neighbors who didn't get their house in the pictures, but I didn't have a big enough camera. So, as I mentioned, we are in the high fire zone, and we're going to be addressing primarily fire code issues because we only had fire or building code. There are other issues we had about this property, but being that that's all you want to listen to, that's all we're going to talk to you about. You can see the dimensions, but the thing is, here's a picture of our street here. The entire street is 20 feet wide. With those cars and trucks parked along there, it's diminished by about 5 to 7 feet. And sometimes people like to park on this side, which they're not supposed to, and then we've got a real problem. Now there, that wall there is where the house, where the ADU is purported to be going in. There are, I'm going to get you the next picture here. This is what can happen, and this isn't even the worst picture. It's just that we took it on this day. It turned out this was a day that there was a fire up on Los Alturas. And we were kind of thinking, my God, if there was a fire here this day, no one's getting in, no one's getting out. So we have some severe kind of evacuation bottlenecks here. Okay. Now, we also say that the threat is not just to our street, but also to APS, which is just above us. And the other day, I was on APS, and there was maybe it was a tree trimming, I'm not quite sure what was going on, but the street in both ways was totally blocked, totally stopped. Nobody knew what was going on, and if something had happened then, well, everyone's going to go. And I don't want to bring up kind of the gruesome stories about people who have died in their cars trying to evacuate an area. So let me get to... The next is the turning radius. Wow. As you can see, it's supposed to be 70 feet. Ours is only 60, but that is even pointless because anybody who parks in there, which is parked all the time, no one's turning around. And what happens is trucks have to back into the street. And we have kids who, one kid was almost hit and now their family is selling the house. Just they couldn't take it anymore. Other kids can't even play on the street because it's this constant kind of traffic, and with backing up trucks, and now with construction, it's not a playland. This next thing is regards to dead ends, which I think is a rather inappropriate kind of term for this. There are no access points to turn around. If there are any emergency vehicles that have to get in or have to turn around, this is a very difficult street. Now, this next thing is about the fire department talking about how houses, all walls of the house, have to be within 150 feet of the street. Well, this is the ADU there, and everything that's in red is beyond 150 feet. Now,
Where's red?
It's above that top blue line.
right here.
Above,
the-
oh, right there, okay.
Yeah.
So that's Pilt.
Yeah. Now there's also a ravine here, which is totally inaccessible. The access to get up there for the fire department is very difficult. They have to come along here in the street here, go up go up here, go up, and it's a slope. It's it's not an easy task. One of the things is they put in the code is if the houses don't fall within the 150 feet, there are sprinklers. Now, we'd have been happy if there were sprinklers, but the state code or something says that if the house in front doesn't have sprinklers, the one in back doesn't have sprinklers, which seems to me a little bit silly. But so this won't have sprinklers as well. So we're kind of done is kind of we're 5 for 5 with regards to disregarding the fire code. And I imagine those codes were put in place for a reason and for particular reasons. I mean, they must have seen what had happened in the past and what they needed in order to make the thing safe. Now, I understand the state has a different kind of one-size-fits-all kind of template that they've kind of put into place here, but this is unfortunately rather difficult to be safe into that template. Now, this is the front of the house where the ADU is going to go. Now, ADU is really kind of, in this case, a kind of a misnomer, because this ADU is going to be larger than the house in front. It's 1,365 square feet, but also if you included the covered balconies, which for some reason they don't include, but it certainly takes up space, it would be closer to 1,600 feet. Now, as I'll mention later, the new ordinance from Santa Barbara ordinance would not allow it to be this size, would not allow it to be 2 stories. And I said, this is 2 stories on a slope which is 24 degrees. So it's going to like be up 60 feet. It's going to be overlooking the city. It's going to be overlooking the houses on either side. And it's actually not a very attractive, I've seen the plan, it's not a very attractive house. You can see that there, the house in front is 1,200 and, I wish my
54.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now this, as I understand, when we looked at on the internet, that this is the largest ADU that's planned in the Lower Riviera. Once again, I think this is not a granny flat, which was originally kind of intended, I think, by the state, so people could, the grandma could move in the back and you could rent out the front. This is going to be their, the front of the house is going to be the front house is going to be the ADU. Now, I thought this was rather prescient or on point. Please do your fire chief. Now, we mentioned that, come on, there you go. We mentioned that at first that we were in the high fire zone, but actually, and in fact, we're in the very high fire hazard severity zone in the Lower Riviera. We're in this little spot here, this little mouse. Yeah. This is a designation which is not given out lightly by CAL FIRE. Very few areas in California. Santa Barbara has a lot of it, and the Riviera has the majority of this designation. Here is, and there is us. Now back to, we believe, the neighbors believe, this ADU in this area is unsafe. The size, the placement, we believe it's a hazard to the neighbors on all sides. Most of the neighbors, especially above, have been evacuated 4 times. It's not like fire isn't going to visit us again. And if fire does visit this area, by the time anybody can get to put out the fire here, it's going to hit this ravine, go up and down, and this whole area is going to be toast. It'll be a miracle if it's just the houses that go and not the people as well. And how do I know it's unsafe? Well, you know, it's not just my is that the city of Santa Barbara itself would not allow this ADU to be built like this now. Their new ordinance says it cannot be 2 stories. It cannot be more than 1,000 square feet. And most importantly, with regards to the fire issue, is they would allow no variance or modification of any fire code requirements. So the fire code issues that we brought up, I don't think they'd be able to overlook those, especially the 150 feet from the street. Actually, before, up until only recently, Santa Barbara wanted a total ban of any houses, any ADUs in this area. And it was only later on that some pressure was brought to bear. And so now they had this kind of amended. Now I understand why the city agreed to the permit. I mean, in a way, their hands were tied. State law said this is what should happen. This is what this overrides this, overrides that, this overrides that. You can read the thing, everything is kind of scratched out. But this one size fits all kind of template does not take into account situations like this, situations where there is a real risk. And if something isn't done, we have this risk forever. It's not just a kind of a one-off kind of problem. Also, a little bit of alarming, or added to our alarm, is that we read the street file that the gentleman who is going to build this ADU plans to build it, an ADU of 1,365 square feet for $180,000. That's also taking into account all the abatements for the violations that have been there for 4.5 years and non-permitted work. And they've been jackhammering away for a month already. So I imagine that $180,000 of the actual money that's going to go for the AD itself is going to be less than 180. Now, you all know, I'm sure you're familiar with, you wouldn't be here if you weren't familiar with building and stuff in city. The average cost per square foot is $300 to $500 dollars per square foot. Even on the low end, it's $200 to $250. This guy is talking something close around $100 a square foot. Now, that's alarming to have a house in this area, in your neighborhood, built for, I mean, I'd call it cheap, or it could be shoddy. So, you know, it's, it seems to us, not maybe, I don't know, but it seems to us we think that this is possibly a case of somebody who is looking to flip this property and trying to build it for as cheaply as possible and flip it. Now, the problem is they flip it, they cash in, and we're left holding the bag for years and years. One family has already put their house up for sale, and we have neighbors who have been in this area for generations. I mean, generations. They grew up as kids here. Their families grew up as kids here, and they spent, you know, millions of dollars on property taxes, and to allow some guy just to kind of come in. This guy's only been here since February, to come in and just you know, cash in at the expense of the neighbors is something which I find a little bit difficult to swallow. We understand, as I said, the city was a little bit big-footed on this, but there is discretion that the state, even in their big-footed law, gave to the city with regards to ADUs could be excluded for health, safety, and fire safety purposes. Now, because this was under state, and it was, well, I kind of call this a stealth ADU, we did not find out about this until February. The paperwork was started in October. All the neighbors have been running around like mad trying to do something about it. We've met with the city, we met with the city council people, we've attended every meeting, we've petitioned our council person, we've sent emails, we've photographs, we've done research, and we've not been able to slow the process by 1 day. And I think that that's a bit unfair. I mean, I understand that they want to have more houses in California, and we're not against ADUs. This ADU might be perfect on the flatland, but we're asking you to. We've had no venue. This is the first venue we've had where we're able to bring our objections, our concerns, and I don't know if it's too late. I mean, we tried to get the permit stopped, and so at least the city's ordinance could come into play, and we could live with the ADU falling under the city's ordinance. I mean, it's still a bit spooky, but it's not as spooky. So I guess what we're saying is you're kind of our last resort. Well, that I didn't know if the parking was one of the issues that I could bring up with regards to this. But yes, the ADU will add to our density problem on the street because they're not required to do any kind of parking. So we're kind of, we feel like we've been kind of railroaded in a way. You know, we've lived in this, we didn't buy our houses to have, you know, if we'd come and seen something like this when we come to buy our house, we probably wouldn't have bought the house. We've been here for, you know, since '99. Some of the people have been here for much, much longer. And we think as a neighborhood, especially, I mean, they're here to say that shouldn't our voice have some weight as well? I understand the state and understand, but cannot we have some input in this? We're going to have to live with this forever. So there was dimensions, there was turning radius, there was dead ends, there was 150 feet from the street, and then if that wasn't 150 feet, there was an exception for sprinklers. Dimensions was the street itself, there had to be at least 20 feet clearance. And being the street is only 20 feet, and any cars on the street means the clearance is less than 20 feet. The music portion will be coming next. I'm teasing. I just want to show you, God, I wish I could just do this with my brain. Here are a list of our 40 neighbors. Some couldn't be here today, but if you wanted testimony from them or an email from them regarding their feelings on this, we would be happy to ask them to reach out to you. We could send you an email of this presentation if you'd like. And I'm open for questions, if there are any questions, or I'll sit down.
Yeah, at this point, does the board have questions?
I do.
Yep, go ahead, John.
Andrew, did Public Works respond or make any comment to the appeal?
No, I spoke with Public Works to ask them about if you're talking about transportation
Right.
aspects of it, yeah. So I spoke with Public Works, Andrew Perez, asked him how they look at ADU applications, and used this specific example after I asked him in general about how they look at it. Planning looks at it first. It follows our routing process. Goes to planning first. They determine the parking demand if there's a change in use. This is an exception in the state law. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you noted it there.
Yeah, it specifically says under subdivision C of this section that accessory dwelling units shall not be required. No, hang on. That was the wrong one. Notwithstanding any other law, a local agency, whether or not it has adopted an ordinance governing accessory dwelling units in accordance with this subdivision, shall not impose parking standards for an accessory dwelling unit in any of the following instances, and gives 5 instances, one of which is the accessory dwelling unit is part of the proposed or existing primary residence or an accessory structure. So I'm not exactly sure what that wouldn't catch, but the state is making it clear that they didn't want to have parking become an obstacle.
Right.
So I confirmed that it went through the correct process. Planning looked at it. There were no proposed changes to the garage, no proposed changes to the driveway. Therefore, they don't route it to transportation planning because there's no basis for them to make a change or require additional parking. Which
Thank
is
you.
and it's aggravating. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then did City Fire respond?
Yeah, so City Fire, I talked to Joe. I asked Joe if he wanted to come, the fire marshal, and present. And he declined. He said he stands by the decision that was made by his staff. He's talked to his staff about the plan check that was done. As I noted in my staff report, they reviewed and approved the application specifically, looking at emergency vehicle access, existing street width, proximity of the structure to the public right-of-way, the 150-foot distance. The state law specifically says that, as it was mentioned here, that we cannot require fire sprinklers if they're not already at the primary residence,
Right.
and that's explicit in the state law.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're saying in essence that they don't care. They're saying that, no, they're basically saying that they don't care. They know that it's beyond 150 feet, and the fire marshal just says they don't care. Is there any?
Yep, are you,
I'm finished.
okay, you're good. At this point, we're going to take some public there's some,
I have a couple of questions.
oh, you still, I'm sorry, okay.
Sorry. Yeah. I had a question about why you have appeared for the first time at this board and why the other boards that you had an opportunity to appeal at, you didn't, did you attend
We
or
did not find
attend?
out about this until February. Now, we have attended every single meeting we could. We also were here for the 24, 25-inch
Right.
countertop. So every opportunity we've had, we've met with the council members singly, as a group. We've gone to the meetings. I've been to every single area of the building, the planning. I've bugged this gentleman by email. We've done everything we possibly could. Now, maybe if we'd learned in October, we might have been able to delay it until the city's ordinance came into play. But that we have not shirked on this, and it isn't like all of a sudden I kind of just waltzed and sashayed in here today just to give you a spiel. No, we've and you can see we have some dedicated neighbors here.
You have a strong neighborhood group here that possibly should have been organized, especially your location, organized together as a group.
We did everything we could.
You
Mr.
are a neighborhood organization then?
Mr. Chair, may I offer something that might clarify the conversation? So, the state law specifically prohibits discretionary review of these applications. So there have been no hearings. There's been no single-family design board, nothing. And the only thing that has been happening are conversations about the ADU ordinance in general, and we've had participation from the neighborhood in that. So they're doing everything they can. They're feeling the impact of the state legislating ADUs as the state pleases without
Absolutely.
considering all the impacts to the neighbors.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, so you're telling me that even neighborhood organizations appearing at, the design review process, or is it ADUs out of the design review process?
The latter. There
Out.
is no design review process.
That used to be for second dwelling units.
It used to be until
It's
this
carried
law was
through
passed.
For the ADUs?
Yeah, when this law was passed, it specifically does not allow, we shall approve or disapprove an application ministerially without discretionary review pursuant to subdivision A within 120 days of receiving an application. So, right.
Yeah.
This is
So
their
we were-
only
we were-
venue to
We were
appeal.
big-footed. The city was big-footed, and we were big-footed. And they're basically saying, and honestly, this is the case. The whole thing they want to overcome, not in my backyard. They want to make sure that neighbors have no recourse to stop these things. I mean, and that's really how the law was put into place, and how they handcuff the city.
Yeah.
They're saying you cannot do anything.
I'm very much, having served on a design review board in Montecito for 8 years, the neighborhood was very important to us and the property values were very important to us. And any neighborhood that came in, be it a group that was organized, we needed a letter from that group, or we needed them to show up and, pose their objections. And I, for one, as a board member, always stood up for the neighborhood. You have a large investment in this neighborhood, and there's no reason why you should not have input. You have the majority of the input already. I'm struggling with the kinds of things that we would have looked at, was that somehow that diameter, that radius turning diameter, we would have looked at the sprinkler systems. Despite what's ruling in this here, we would have said, I'm sorry, I believe the situation poses a severe danger to the community. I see that, what you're talking about. It's not like it's falling on deaf ears. And I'm just trying to think of a way to help you get some foothold here. I think, though, the building department has ruled properly according to what the laws are that they have. But the ADU is such a wide open territory. It's almost like a gunslinger and cowboys and, and bad guys fighting it out. We struggle too, is what I'm trying to say. I hear what you're saying. We're struggling with it.
Well,
too.
the city has passed an ordinance, and as I mentioned, we could live with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a bit of a risk, but it's less of a risk. And
You're
There-
referring to the ordinance that says that you may look at these other issues that the state says
Well, the
you
state
cannot
is,
look
is
at.
that they give a limit of, you cannot do 2 stories. You,
If
the,
the existing structure is 1 story, you cannot build a detached ADU that is 2 stories.
and because of the limited size of the lot, they wouldn't let it be 1,200 square feet.
Mr. Chair, I want
we-
everybody to
yeah,
be heard, and so we can hear you, but we're recording this.
Yeah, we're
and if anybody
recording
wants
that,
a
so if
transcript, they're
someone
not going to, they won't even hear. So if you want to come up, I know it may
Yeah.
feel odd. but
And
just-
also, I
just
believe
come
that,
on up.
I believe at least to this case is the and also the variance with regards to, there is even in the state law that discretion, is there not? I mean, where their ADUs could be not permitted regarding fire safety and the like.
The pad.
It was interesting. They required, Mr. Chair, in response to the appellant's question about the applicability of state building standards, they said that all the state building standards that are adopted, building, fire, plumbing, mechanical, green building, and energy code all apply. And then they went through kind of categorically and started exempting things. So location on property, where if we have a detached garage, carriage house built in the early 1900s on the property line, the back of the property, they want to convert that to a dwelling unit. We cannot require them to have fire-resistive constructed walls like we would for a new building. We have to allow that. And on top of that, we can't require it to have sprinklers if the 1928 house in front of it didn't have sprinklers. So, I mean, the state they were very calculating in how they were going to handcuff cities and counties and say, here it comes, I hope you enjoy it. This is what you're going to be eating. And they
Also,
gave it
this
to us.
is the last time, I mean, once the city's ordinance goes into play, this will be the only one of its kind in the city. I mean, we're going to have a kind of an outlaw ADU, and which is going to be unfair to say if we wanted to then build like a 1,200 square foot, 3-story something in our back, we wouldn't be able to do it. I'm not saying that's an issue for us, but there's a certain, I'm just addressing kind of the fairness issue.
I have another question. Is there a precedent in the city where there's been an ordinance or a code change where something that was approved under an old code was then reevaluated under the new ordinance?
Mr. Chair and board members, if we're talking about retroactivity of an ordinance or a code requirement, that is possible. It's very unusual, and it has to be explicit in the ordinance that that's what it's doing. In this instance, the city council made the decision on Tuesday that 30 days later the ordinance would go into effect, and that's based on the building permit application date. To the best of my knowledge, I can confirm that for the board, but it was not retroactive.
Was not, okay.
So it does create, the possibility and reality that we're going to have some projects that got permitted before that 30-day ordinance implementation date, and they're going to look and feel different than the projects permitted afterwards.
Okay.
I have a question. Is there any way we can make it retroactive?
That's what I was wondering.
Oh, okay, good.
Not without.
Same question. Is there any way we could grant their appeal to have this
Evaluated
unit,
under the new ordinance.
built under the new city ordinance?
So, Mr. Chair and board members, here are the options that I see available to you if that's what your intent is. One, the most cumbersome and time-consuming would be to vote to direct staff to return to ordinance committee with a recommendation from the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals to amend the ADU ordinance and make it retroactive. I mean, you can do that if you'd like, and I don't want to discourage you if that's what you want to do, because it would make a statement for the community. It would be, highly unlikely that would happen, but that's just my estimation, and I don't want to discourage you from making the statement that you want to make. So that's an option. The other option is if you can find in the approval process, the ministerial approval process that we went through, that we neglected to consider something, then you can make the finding that that permit was issued without considering all the necessary ministerial facts. Right? So,
Could I raise something towards that?
yeah, that would be at the pleasure of the chair.
Go ahead.
In their street file, there were violations which went back 4.5 years, which they had signed with the city saying they would abate them. Also, I remember seeing that there was a fine of like $200 each day if they didn't do it. Now, the city then said, "Oh, those are minor," but the backyard was not minor. I mean, and they had other unpermitted work with the air conditioning system that they put in. I mean, they were contacted by the city 4 times to change the lateral because they were having flooding, but they just blew them off. Finally, they were fined on it. But
What happened was it flooded 3 times.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What happened was that the property actually flooded 3 times, and then they ignored the city's demands to fix the lateral. The property flooded 3 times, and then they fixed it. And if you like, you can check with George Buell because he was their tenant at the time.
So what I'm saying is that I was surprised, actually. One of the issues we brought up to the city was, how can you permit this when you have all these violations? And they just rolled the violations into the ADU permit. And I thought that, I thought at least that would be able to delay it to some degree. These are people, and we don't know these people. You know, they've been here since February. When they first came in, like 5 years ago, they came in saying they were going to live there forever, and then they basically were doing this there to fix the place up, to rent it, and then boom. Now, what's going to happen here is $180,000 has got to be a clue of something that they don't intend to build some structure that they're going to move their family into, no matter what they say. I mean, you're going to move your family into a structure which is built in a high fire zone for $180,000, actually probably more like $100,000. I mean, you should see the contractors. I don't know who these people are. I mean, they've been jackhammering away, and all of a sudden they find out there's stones here. I mean, it's also people have. One of our neighbors has an issue with regards to the drainage, because it's flooded 2 houses or 3 houses in the past, and the water goes right by his house. But we haven't been able to address these kind of issues with you. I mean, there are a passel of them.
So, Mr. Chair, I do have copies of the building permit that's in question, and I also have copies of the zoning information report that was mentioned that identifies the violations that were abated along with the permit for the ADU, if you're interested. And I have copies for the public if they'd like them.
Right, got another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I've seen enough information regarding fire to question and maybe request that City Fire take another look at it. Do you think Joe would be open to that? Andrew?
Mr. Chair and board members, we don't have to be, staff does not have to be open to it. You can direct us to do whatever you would like.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
You just have to make a finding. I mean, I do need to qualify that. So
Well, state your name and.
you have to make a finding.
My name is Miles Barrett,
Okay,
and
I was
I'm
gonna
at
call you
845 De La Guerra Terrace. And you started on a train of thought that I'd love to hear the completion of it. Because I think that all of the neighbors here are not against ADUs, but they would love this structure to be in compliance with the ordinance that the city carefully put together. So if this board finds that there is reason to pull this permit back to whoever has to review it, would the new ADU have to comply with the ordinance that's being put into place? That's the question. And if that's possible, I think that would be the solution to this whole problem. It would be wonderful for the neighborhood to just see this ADU comply with an ordinance that the city spent a year and a half putting together. So that we kind of lost that train of thought, and I'd just love to see the focus go back to that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm Susan Capiello,
Okay.
and I'm up there on that list. But what was just mentioned, may take longer if you have to go back and revisit the ordinances that were just passed by the city, versus the second option, I believe you said, was if there was in fact there's some exceptions in the state law. And that is what Will's whole presentation was, is there are 5 fire regulation violations. And that's an exception that the state provides, is fire and safety. And that's what that cul-de-sac is up against. I don't even know, I asked them, I said, has the fire department been down there? And they said, we can't figure that out. They just keep saying, we're familiar with the street. Does that mean on a map? Or does that mean, have you been, I drove down there and I had to back up and the UPS guy and I are waving at each other. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I just wanted to say, I thought maybe the second option, which is to use the exception that's available to us through state law to maybe appeal this bugger. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, if they would, Molly. Would Molly put a request in? You're good? Okay. You're good. How about Sylvia?
Dead horse.
Okay.
Someone need, why don't somebody make a motion?
Vince, if you're
Any men-
Vince,
Hi, hello. My name is Sylvia Corral, and I'm actually.
one moment, just point of order.
Hold on.
Vince, if you're going to have conversations, you need to have them in the microphone, okay? So everybody can hear the conversation. Thank you. That's all right.
Apologies.
Just so you know.
First, I'm very glad to hear that the City Council is actually listening to this neighborhood group. I am here as a landlord who has provided housing for people and have really looked at the ADU and wondered, can I encourage other people to do ADUs? Now, my experience with the city has been that every single time we try to improve or increase housing, we get looked at, reviewed, and fined. We put a covering on a garage, just, closed it off for storage. The city found out, and we were made to remove the garage. Not only that, they came and inspected 5 other things, and we were then forced to do all of that. We were fined $5,000 for a covering shed that went out 3 feet more on the patio. So if the city is able to do those things to current landlords who try to improve their property, to improve the housing conditions for these ADUs, I don't understand how you are permitting such an atrocity in this neighborhood. Because what I see as an outsider is someone's going to get rich. This is not going to provide housing for anyone who can afford less than $4,000, $3,000 a month, because that is what it costs to rent in that neighborhood. That is totally defeating the purpose of the ADU. And so I encourage you to not let these kinds of atrocities, abuses of a law, because people have money to be able to make it happen. I'm a landlord, I don't have money to make more ADUs because I'm renting reasonable rents to income, low working, middle class people, and I am not abusing the system. And the city abuses me because I get fined every time I do something without a permit, and I didn't even know there was a permit needed so that I could improve the top of the patio that was falling down, and it went out 3 feet more. Okay. I didn't even know there was a permit. And when you try to get permits through, do you know how many months it takes to get a permit through? Okay, so I am talking about real world and what you're doing to real people that are trying to really solve the housing problems, and what is happening here, which is an abuse of money and the law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody would else like to speak that didn't give us a slip? Would you?
Chairman, I didn't take 2 minutes. I was just speaking right on point. If I could,
You got 30 seconds.
you know, I am at the end of the street, and as you mentioned, drainage is an issue for me. I mean, every drop of water that comes off that property essentially drains through my driveway and into the gully. That's something that wasn't considered. And there's so many things that the city couldn't consider because the state had rammed this down your throat that now can be considered under the ordinance. And if there is a way, and I think that this is not with a wink, I think there are legitimate concerns for fire, for you all to pull this thing back in. And when it comes back out, it's going to have to comply with the ordinance. I believe that was what that question is still not answered. I don't know if you can answer that or the city attorney needs to answer that. But that's all we're asking for. Make it comply with the ordinance. That's it.
Thank you. Okay. I think anybody else would like to speak, or we will close.
We should have, you made a comment and never identified yourself. Do you think she should identify?
That's,
No?
no,
Yeah,
but
she
she
may have,
probably should, but at this point, it would be difficult to try to figure out what point
Yeah.
in time she made the
Okay.
comment. And so we'll acknowledge we had several comments made by members of the public in the neighborhood who were here who went unnamed.
Okay. At this point, we will close public comment and move if there's any questions for the board, for the appellant, or
Yeah.
you have a question?
I have a couple of questions. One is the size of the ADU. Could you tell us how that was computed to become and what the maximum limit is for ADUs currently?
I cannot, Mr. Chair and board members, tell you how we calculate that. That's not something that I calculate,
Yeah.
that I'm fluent in. And I have heard different things, but I wouldn't want to speculate. So I would trust that in the Building and Safety Division and Planning Division and Fire Department reviews that they validated the square footage was not exceeding a maximum the state was allowed.
It's my understanding that the maximum was 1,200. And so I assume there was exceptions or something came into play here. And so I was just curious, since it is such a wide open field right now, we don't,
All I can tell you that it's explicit in the permit that it was 1,365. So it was not that someone proposed less and then approved more, accidentally. If you would like, you can direct staff to go back and validate and provide, the justification for that.
I'm just looking for a couple of reasons we can get somehow validation for questions here, that we can maybe base a motion or, to proceed.
You can.
So
We can?
You can. We can make that motion.
I also want to kind of, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, just take a minute, literally, to respond to the options that we discussed, right? The revising the ordinance or trying to make a finding that the permit was issued in error and needed to be reevaluated. That reevaluation would have to result in a substantially new application, right? Because your application for a project is vested when you submit those plans and make that application on that date. So validating things or revalidating things, we can do that. We can at least address the concerns. It may not be to the neighborhood's satisfaction, but we could say, yes, fire did look at the proximity of the building and the exterior walls to the public right of way. It was more than 150 feet. They acknowledged that. This was their basis for their decision. As long as it doesn't result in a change to the project, a pretty much complete change to what they're proposing, they're still going to be able to use the state law. The city's new ordinance won't apply unless they submit a new project. So I just want to make sure that you understand that. That's kind of a bright line for whether or not they comply with the new ordinance or whether they comply with the state law.
And if they were to submit in the next 27 days, it would still be under the old state.
Yeah,
ordinance.
Mr. Chair, board members, that's correct.
So I have a question. Are you saying that if the fire marshal came back and said, yeah, at second look, I do think that there's a problem here, doesn't that mean they'd have to make some changes?
Making changes like adding fire sprinklers does not constitute a new project. typically, right? It would have to be someone looking wholesale at it and saying, we're not going to be able to put this building where we had cited it before, or the size of the building is such that we're going to have to change it significantly, and it is a whole new plan check. It's a whole new project for us to look at.
Questions? Anybody have any questions for either? No? Marcia?
In terms of the benefit to the city, our decision here, I'm trying to find a way whereby some things get reviewed for the neighborhood that, got sort of washed away because of state law regarding the developments of ADUs. But if we were to do that, would it help other ADUs in the city as far as development's concerned? I'm really concerned about the lack. I know the reason why the lack of review, but I'm also concerned because there isn't, especially in this type of situation where, they're always involved in fires. It's not like they're on, once in 50, 60 years they get involved in a fire. Then, it's quite frequently. And I just would like to see, it seems to me not minor, it's major. The fire issues are really major. Even we would have probably said the turnaround in exchange for no fire sprinklers. There's no, I want to try to bring in the owner developer kind of responsible to answering to the neighborhood to say, okay, I'm getting this for free because of state, not city laws, and therefore I'm willing to give you this to allow me to do so. And that kind of interaction creates a bond between the neighbor. The things we don't consider with ADUs, so that's not considered anywhere, is some kind of bond between the neighborhood and that ADU going in. So there's not this complete feeling of a cancer has just dropped on us and we have to deal with it. Have I made
Mr. Chair, I'm not
myself
sure what the question was.
clear? My question is, I'm trying to look at a way of where we can rule here, which would benefit the city as far as future reviews. I know they have this ordinance coming through, but you said that we could look at certain things that we felt had been misdiagnosed, and we could ask for re-review, and then maybe base and also ask for that re-review to be used to sort of restore the rights under the new ordinance of the city.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, that would only be if in asking staff to go back and revalidate their approval, right, and confirm that they didn't miss anything. In doing that, if staff found errors that could only be resolved by a redesign or a new project. You want to take a minute
sorry,
and get
I turned
that?
it off. I don't
That's
get why
okay.
it's talking to me.
Have to get it out and turn it off.
Sorry. Oh, I
At
know
least it's
why.
pleasant.
Yeah, at least it's kind of elevator music, huh?
You know what it is? It's just.
Okay, so I'll kind of
Yeah.
start over just to get that train of thought. So you'd have to make a finding that, based on the evidence submitted, the board believes that staff did not adequately validate whatever the fire life safety concern is that you have, right? And direct staff to go back and review that again and confirm that that was properly reviewed and validate their approval or invalidate it. And that if it's invalidated, if their approval's invalidated and it doesn't stand any longer, the remedy would have to result in a new project, a new application for permit, right? Because it's a new project. It's that vesting date. When someone makes an application, that's the code that they apply to, unless some ordinance is unusual and states otherwise. But the general rule is when they drop the plans in on the counter, we take their money, we say we've got an application for building permit. Whatever codes and ordinances that are in effect on that day are the codes and ordinances that stand for the life of that project, right? So the only way you can have this particular project result in having to comply with a new ordinance is to make that finding and have staff advise the property owner that they can't approve it as it is. They made an error, and it would require a redesign. That was a new project, required a new review. That's one avenue. The other avenue is to try to have the ordinance amended, which is a statement the board can make, right? Whether or not that can happen, I mean, I can speculate all I want, and we all have opinions in here of what might happen. But the board can make a statement, right? And they can make that request. And then that goes higher up into the city clerk and city attorney, city administrator's office, and to city council, and they will let us know if they want to follow the board's direction or not. But the board could make that decision and be heard if that's that's at the discretion of the board, if that's what you decide you want to do. What you can't do is, and I just caution you on, making a decision that will incorporate design review or discretionary review of the project. That the law specifically prohibits. So you have to be careful that you structure your findings and your direction to staff such that it's clear that you're not trying to engage discretionary review, because because if you make that decision and I'll take it to the city attorney and say, I need you to tell me, is this legal? Can the board do this? They may say that's not legal because the state law specifically says no discretionary review. So they may not, but I would anticipate that they would, because the state law is, blatantly explicit of what they're trying to do. I hope that helps, and I wasn't too verbose. I'm sorry.
Now, how do we word that?
John had it.
I got it.
Yeah,
John's got it.
All right, let me make a motion.
yeah, like
Okay.
board to make a motion.
Make a motion that the city reevaluate the permit approval for this project, and particularly with respect to the fire safety aspect of that approval.
Okay, Mr. Chair, can I ask for just a clarification for the record? We'll have it on audio so that we know. But when you say the fire issues, are you speaking to the emergency vehicle access?
Emergency vehicle access in the 150-foot distance
Okay.
in particular.
The capacity of the street and turnaround as part of the
Capacity of the
EVA,
street,
as part of the
turnaround,
emergency
yeah.
vehicle access.
Correct.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
Do we have a second?
So second?
We have more discussion?
Yeah.
No,
Would
well,
board you have a question?
No, I just want to be clear that we're having it reviewed on that it's in violation of three aspects, and we also like it reviewed in the light of the fires and flood damages that we have experienced in December, January, of this year and last year, and the devastation it has caused for everyone. And we don't want to see this happen. Every provision we can make comes from that perspective, not to defy what state has mandated. It's to bring that extra consideration into why we ask. It's violating on three aspects in the fire access issues, and we need those reviewed in the light of the damages we have recently experienced.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm taking that as a comment on the motion.
Okay.
I'd like to call the question.
So John's asking for a vote.
Yeah, there's a motion. So there's a second.
Right.
I second
Vince?
it, yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? No? Motion carries.
Do we want to consider a second motion?
Okay, first, you have a standing motion. So so the standing motion relative to the appeal is, and we go through this every time, it's kind of weird, but the way it's set up in the city is that the first motion on the floor is to uphold the decision of the building official. So given what I think the intent of the board is, and please don't be influenced by my comments, just take them as my understanding of the fact of the matter. What I understand the facts of the matter are relative to the board's just recent motion. There was an assumption that they were they were voting. Well, I'd like you to vote on the decision to uphold the decision of the building official, and I'm anticipating that you're not going to uphold it. It's backward. It's
Understood,
like
yeah.
a double negative thing, but it's the way we
But,
have to do it.
I mean, the way I formulated the motion wasn't to say that there was anything done wrong by the city in approving the permit. Just that I wanted the city to reevaluate it based on information that we now have. That's all.
And Mr. Chair, I understand that, and I think, and I know we can do that, but I also know that we have to dispose of the standing motion that was in front of it, and I'm sorry, I should have interrupted you, John. And
I'd like to make a motion that we not uphold the.
Just, you want to call to vote, Mr. Chair, call to vote,
Okay.
the standing motion to uphold the decision of the building official, and I understand based on prior motions that you're probably going to vote against upholding the decision. Because what I understand the board's intent is to not uphold the decision of the building official to issue the building permit, and instead have the building official retract that decision and revalidate the fire issues, and then render a new decision.
Okay, so we were going to vote on upholding the decision,
Oh,
and there's a motion for this, which, is there a motion for that
There's a
decision?
standing motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we uphold the decision of the building official.
That's the standing motion. So just take a vote, and let's not. I don't want to mess this up. So I'm
Hey.
anticipating that you're gonna.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah. That's
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
no.
Oh, no, nay, nay,
That's the
Okay.
nay.
Nay.
Yeah, John.
Yeah.
John,
No,
lead
no,
him.
it's
Lead
just
him
now.
through this, John. I can't do it because I'm in conflict. So please lead him through this.
We have to say we're not upholding the building official in order to make the motion that I did in the first place. So
Exactly.
we should have done that first, but
Yeah.
Wait a minute. This is all in recording, so.
Absolutely.
Now, what do we just vote on? Upholding or
Well,
not upholding?
we
Not upholding.
that was an error.
Not upholding.
All right.
But the motion was upholding, and our
that's why we
response
voted
was
no
nay.
to the motion.
So let's
So let's-
make
let's-
some note that we're
Let's
canceling.
recall. Let's do the vote
Call the-
again. Let's state the motion and do
John,
the vote
you
again, so it's
speak.
really clear for the record.
The motion is that, the standing motion is that we are upholding the building official's decision. And that's the motion that I'm making, and you seconded. And now we're all going to vote no. Right?
Yeah.
All right, ready?
Okay.
No.
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we did it backwards.
Right, that's right. Got the point
Okay,
across.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, Marcia, do you want to consider making a motion that the city take a look at amending and making the ADU, the new ADU ordinance retroactive?
Do I do that first, or do
Well,
we do
we'll
your
just- we can
ordinance?
just talk-
of the
we can just
three?
talk, yeah.
Okay, I make a
something we wanna
motion
consider.
that the ordinance the city has, is awaiting approval or execution on, is it, in 30 days, be reviewed in the light of the 3 violations, fire department violations, we find are important to this project.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to, Marcia, if I
is-
can, let me jump in because I sense you're struggling. I think
I'm
what
struggling.
we're talking about a broader issue now of the ordinance itself.
Okay.
And
Do I
John,
just
if
make
you want to
that?
kind of
Sure, I
explain
can go
what
ahead.
you're
and
thinking.
I'd like to make a motion that the city staff relook at the current ADU ordinance that was recently approved by city council and look at amending it to make it retroactive for all ADU projects that have been approved.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second.
Motion
Now
second.
let's talk about it, all right?
Okay.
So this would mean,
Okay.
it's a lot of work for the city.
Yeah.
Probably has very little chance of getting approved at city council. But we see, and we're talking about it now, that there's projects that are going through that maybe aren't what the city, in the best interest of the city and neighborhood groups, period. Maybe not just this one. But I don't know how many projects this would affect. It's probably an awful lot of work for the city staff. But like Andrew said, it would be us making a statement saying that, hey, city council should we recommend city council take a second look at
yeah.
this and possibly make it retroactive. All right?
And
Yeah, I look at it too. I look at this as making a statement, and if we don't make a statement, who's going to?
Well, they'd like to.
yeah.
Okay, so that's your.
And my feeling is that the important issues to address here are the recent 2 months, estimated to be another 5 years of hardship to this community due to the recent fires and debris flows, which are all possibilities in this area to happen again. It's not, it's a high-risk area, more than likely to occur, and was devastating to this community. I, for one, was affected by this, and I never want to see anyone else go through that. So we are not making this request lightly in lieu of the fact that it requires so much review. We're making it as a request as part of the environment we live in and the trouble that we face with this environment. It's directly related to our environmental and directly related to 3 fire department, as you mentioned, John, the road access, the turnaround, and the non-sprinkler requirement that puts us at risk. Other people, not just this one, and not just this neighborhood, but other people as well. Okay.
Okay.
You can make the.
So let's call the question.
What is
So we're taking, John wants you to take a vote.
Let's take a vote.
Let's take a vote on the,
A very brief summary of what we're voting.
Sure. That the city staff amend the recently approved ADU ordinance to make it retroactive.
Okay.
There's a motion. Is there a
I
second?
second.
Second.
On favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Okay.
One
So I'm going to,
question.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to just read into the record what I understand to be the motions and actions the board's taken today in the order that they probably should have fallen. So the first is that the board has made a decision to not uphold the decision of the building official to issue the building permit, the ADU building permit for the 836 De La Guerra Terrace. So that my decision, the decision of my office to issue the permit is not upheld by the board. So we will be telling that permit holder they no longer have a valid permit. That decision's been overturned by the board. Then the second motion that I'm in order, I think, was actually the first motion, was that the board directed staff to have the fire hazard concerns that were raised by the appellants revalidated or relooked at, reconsidered prior to my office considering issuing a building permit again for that project. And then the third motion, the third item was a more comprehensive direction from the board to staff to go to the city administrator and let him know that the board feels that the current, the ADU ordinance that was approved on Tuesday of this week by City Council should be looked at again for retroactivity to all ADUs applied for, and I'm going to assume it was since the state law was put into effect, was the intent of the board. If that, is that, please let me know, any board member, if I have that incorrect.
Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can, Mr. Chair, you can close out the meeting, I think, at this point.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Vince has the motion. I'll get the second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Thank you, board members. Thank you.